it, high doors face outer walls lined with grated windows that provided indirect light and air. Auburn 1821 to 1825 implemented a three-level classification system. Auburn 1829 to 1825 implemented a three-level classification system. Under it, minor offenders labored in workshops during the day and retired to separate cells at night. Serious offenders alternated their days between solitary confinement and congregate work. The most hardened criminals were placed in solitary confinement without work. After numerous suicides, instances of mental illness, and attempted escapes, the governor of New York terminated the classification system and the experiment in solitary confinement. Subsequently, all male inmates worked in congregate shops day by day, returning to individual cells at night. Females first committed to Auburn in 1825 were relegated to an attic and excluded from regular work and erased. Elma Lynch enforced a quasi-military routine of absolute silence, strict discipline, and economic productivity. In response to bells, head-shaven inmates dressed in striped clothing silently march in lockstep formation to and from their cells for meals and work assignments. Letters were banned and the chaplain was only occasional visitor. Flogging and other forms of corporal punishment enforced the rules. Such regimentation was thought necessarily to restrain the rebellious nature of the offenders. Eventually, overcrowding was made the silent system unenforceable, and Auburn's system of discipline deteriorated into corrupt and lax routines of harsh punishment. After the Civil War, the spirit of reform withered and contract labor was no longer profitable. Despite the demise of the ideal system, Auburn remained the model of nearly a country, primarily because it had been inexpensive to construct and maintain. Unlike Auburn or Sing Sing, Pennsylvania's Eastern Penitentiary 1829 was intended to keep convicts separate even as they worked, in order to prevent any earthly contamination or distraction that might impede their repentance. Hence, the term penitentiary, located on Cherry Hill on the outskirts of Philadelphia Eastern, represented one of the most imposing and expensive architectural achievements in the United States to date, and it contained innovations such as running water and flush toilets in all cells. Although Beaumont and Jockyville found it incontestable, and this perfect isolation secures the prisoners from all fatal contamination. They favored cost-effective Auburn plan, which seemed more likely to enable states to profit from convict labor. The Auburn system, also known as the New York system and congregate system, is a penal method of the 19th century in which persons worked during the day in groups and were kept in solitary confinement at night, with enforced silence at all times. The silent system evolved during the 1820s at Auburn Prison in Auburn, New York, as an alternative to a modification of the Pennsylvania system of solitary confinement, which it gradually replaced In the United States, Whigs favored this system because it promised to rehabilitate criminals by teaching from personal discipline and respect for work, property, and other people. Among notable elements of the Auburn system were striped uniforms, locksteps, and silence. During the 19th century, prisoners had no rights nor any opportunity to live semi-comfortably. The Auburn system established several characteristics that were unique to the world of disciplinary conditions. Silence was the biggest factor among rules for the prisoners. John D. Cray, a deputy warden at the Auburn prison, demanded that prisoners' sense of self. When the sense of self was taken away, many convicts obeyed the warden's wishes. The second characteristic of the Auburn system was community activities. During regimented times during the day, prisoners had tasks to perform. Some of these included making nails, barrels, clothing, shoes and boots, carpets, buttons, carpenters, tools, steam engines and boilers, combs, harnesses, furniture, brooms, clocks, buckets, and pails, saddle, trees. During the 1840s, the prison began to produce silk using silkworms and trees. The Auburn Correctional Facility was the first prison to profit from prisoner labor. The prison had many sightseers. In the 19th century, the goal of this system was to instill good habits and ideas of industry that were good habits and ideas supposed to be rehabilitative. Elam Linds, in association with John D. Cray, developed a revolutionary system of transporting convicts within the prison. The prisoners marched in union and locked their arms to the convict in front of them. The prisoners had to look to one side and were not allowed to look at guards or other inmates. The clothing at the prison was grayish material with horizontal lines. Constructed in 1816, the Auburn Prison, it was the second state prison in New York after New York City's Newgate 1797 to 1828, the site of the first execution by electric chair in 1890, and the namesake of the Auburn system, a correctional system in which prisoners were housed in solitary confinement in large rectangular buildings and performed penal labor under silence that was enforced at all times. The prison was renamed the Auburn Correctional Facility in 1970. The prison is among the oldest functional prisons in the United States. In its early years, the prison changed a fee to tourists in order to raise funds for the prison. Eventually, to discourage most visitors, the fee was increased. In contrast with the purely reformatory type prison instituted in Pennsylvania, the Philadelphia system introduced by the Quakers, the Auburn system modified the schedule of prayer, contemplation, and humane condition with hard labor. Prisoners were compelled to work during the day, and the profit of their labor helped to support the prison. Prisoners were segregated by offense. Additionally, they were issued clothing that identified their crime. The traditional American prison uniform, consisting of horizontal black and white stripes, originated at the Auburn prison. The prisoners had their heads closely cropped and walked in lockstep, keeping step with their heads bowed. Each prisoner placed a hand on the shoulder of the man in front of him to maintain a rigid separation. There was a communal dining room so that the prisoners could gather together